Hello, financial algebra students. We are going to do a quick and brief introduction into some Google Sheets tricks, which will eventually become second nature to you. And if we start slow and just introduce them a little bit at a time, things should go pretty smoothly. So the first thing you need to do is go to your Google where you have your little waffle box here where you can open up some Google apps, and you've done that before, but you've probably not clicked on Sheets very often. So we'll open up Sheets, and then we will open up a blank sheet. And it looks like a pretty boring grid of rectangular boxes, which, what would I ever need to do this for? So it's like a Google Doc, except it's organized into little, they call them cells. These little boxes are cells. And they're arranged, A to Z and 1 through whatever. So if I wanted to click on that cell, it would be E7 and so on and so forth. They all have a name, right? So that would be C4, that would be M13. So there's like a location, sort of like playing Battleship, same idea. So the first thing we're going to do, when you've done this before, is just let's name this thing Practice. So go up and click on Untitled, change it to Practice. That's no different than a Google Doc. Okay. So I'm going to zoom in, and you know that you can do Control plus or wheel your mouse up. That wasn't good. Okay. So this should be easier to see now. Now I'm going to type the word, or the words, Colony Central High School in cell A1. But it spilled over. It didn't fit in A1. There's a couple of ways around that, and we're going to teach them both to you right now, because you might want to use one method at one time and another method at another time. So Colony Central High School didn't fit. You could, if you go with your mouse between A and B, or really between any two, see how when you put it right between A and B, you can click on that little border and stretch it out to here. So now you're moving the border over to here. So now A is a wider column. And if you needed it to be really wide, you could. If you needed it to be really narrow, you could. But in this case, I want it to be about that big. And so that's one trick to do it. Another way would be what they call wrapping text. So let's go down just a little bit to, A6. And let's type in something longer. Colony Central High School Financial Algebra class. That clearly didn't fit. Now we could do the same thing again, but notice that if you have something really long, would it really make sense just to make a ridiculously wide column? Instead, I'm going to make 6 and 7, this little border here, a little bit, like maybe twice as tall. Okay, that didn't solve the problem yet. But now I'm going to click on my cell, A6 it's in. That's where it's really starting from. And I'm going to go to Format, Text Wrapping, Wrap. And it basically forces it underneath itself. As long as the cell is tall enough, you can do it that way. You could have done it that way for this too, but Colony Central High School wasn't abnormally long, so I chose to make the cell bigger. Here, you can wrap text, which puts everything nicely tucked into a box, just like you were hitting return and going back to the next line. Okay, so that's called wrapping text. Okay, the next little trick is called merging cells. So if you have your screen set up like mine, if you're doing this with me, you can go to C6, D6, and E6. Right, so I'm going to highlight those three. What if I wanted one big huge cell and knock the walls down between them? So I had one big room instead of 3 little rooms. Once they're highlighted, there's actually a shortcut right here that's merge, but you can find it under Format, Merge Cells, Merge All. But again, the shortcut is right there. And look, it made one big cell with no walls in it. So let's say I wanted to center, right? Center my text in there with maybe a bigger font in a different font, and type in, right? So that's one big cell now. And what if I wanted to put a border around it? So here's a next skill. And we use a lot of borders in this class to make things really pretty and organized. So if you go up here to this little window pane looking thing, that's the border tool. So we click on the border tool, and you have all sorts of choices here. This one will put borders around all the cells that you created. This is just around the outline. But since we only have one cell, they'd be the same thing right now. So I'm going to click on that one and see how it put a border around it. You could, if you wanted to, go to the thickness tool and make the border thicker. And now, what if I wanted to highlight these 3 rows and those 7, or 3 columns and those 7 rows, and put borders around every one of those? Okay. Maybe I'll change the width of that. And I wanted this column to be yellow, and this column to be green, this column to be pink. So you can make things look very, very organized that way. So since that is one cell, I could even go black background with white font. That looks pretty cool. So there's different ways you can organize things. So we just talked about wrapping text, making cells and columns bigger, merging cells, and some coloring of cells, right? Now, let's scroll down here. What if I typed red, orange, oops, gotta know my rainbow, yellow, and my spelling, green, blue, purple. But what if I wanted to alphabetize those? I could highlight everything I want to alphabetize, and I could go over to data, sort range, and it knows I'm in column C, so it's suggesting, do you want to sort by column C? Yes, I do. A to Z? Yes, that's what I want. Hit sort, and it reorganized the rainbow alphabetically, B, G, O, P, R, Y. So if you ever need to do that alphabetically, you can. It does this, it treats A to Z like numbers too. So if I typed in 10, 13, 2, 98, 43, 4, and I wanted to go to highlight them first, data, sort range, and it knows I'm in column D, so yes, I want to do column D. And I know it's kind of weird because it says A to Z and it's numbers, but A to Z is also low to high. So hit sort, and it went 2, 4, 10, 13, 43, 98. So you'll be able to sort things, which we do a lot in this class with that tool there. And since I have some words and some numbers here, just happen to end up next to each other randomly, I'm going to make a chart or a graph based on that information. Blue being 2, green being 4, orange being 10, so on and so forth. I'm going to move this over to the right. So I'm going to make a chart. I'm going to highlight that data from blue down to 98, both columns. Then I'm going to go to Insert, Chart, and it opens up with a pie graph. So that's something you might want, right? Like what if, it's kind of weird that the colors don't match, but look at, if you click pie chart and you went to maybe a bar chart, right? You could rank things that way. You could go to a line graph, which we do a lot in this class later on. We could talk about money changing or percentages changing over time. And then you could customize this. It looks a little boring there, right? So I could go to customize and change the background color to something that looks a little nicer. And there's just little features that you can do to make this look a lot cooler for presentation's sake. So we just learned a little bit on how to make a graph, which we do. We learned alphabetizing or numerically sorting, which we'll do a lot of. We learned the basics of just coloring cells to organize data. We started off by learning how to make columns wider and narrower. We also learned how to wrap text to get things to fit in smaller widths and tuck the letters underneath it. And we learned how to knock down walls and merge cells. So that's the basics, and we'll get into this more with little projects that, again, don't have much to do with finance yet, but we're going to practice spreadsheets and Google Sheets for some time so that when we start doing the money stuff in this class, you'll have a much better idea of how to organize things, and there'll be less questions later on. And one of the benefits of this course is just learning the spreadsheet. Even if the content, the content aside, which is very interesting and useful, learning how to use the spreadsheet is just as important down the road in jobs or colleges or courses later on. All right. Thanks for watching.